Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining the Right Pen Collective's poetry session today. It's very exciting to all be here. My name is Annie McCann. I'm one of the co-founders of the Right Pen Collective. I co-founded this network with these lovely sisters, Uska, Sevendik Alkan, and Aksan Ilan. It's basically an initiative in an effort to connect, support, and empower Australian Muslim writers here in Australia. We kicked off this morning with a fun panel with the amazing Dr. Randa Abdel Fattah talking about her work, her journey to publication, and of course the gaps and the challenges that we do face as Muslim writers in the book publishing industry. Today, however, I'm introducing three amazing poets. This is very exciting. So first, foremost, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which I am streaming to you from today. Specifically, I'm coming to you live from the Daruk land of the Aurora Nation. I'd like to extend my respects to tribal elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledging that the land I'm on is stolen and sovereignty was not conceded. So today's guest, it's amazing to be here. Welcome, ladies. First, I would like to introduce you to Maryam Azam, Rania Ahmed, and last but not least, Sara Saleh, both very accomplished poets. It's very exciting to meet you all here. So first of all, thank you very much for being our guests for the Right Pen Collective. So we're going to have a chat to the three of them in terms of their writing journey and the poetry journey and things that they have published. Any gaps that they've faced, any questions that you have, please send them through directly to myself. My name is the Right Pen Collective today, so find me on the chat and send your your question directly to me, and I'll make sure that those questions get asked. And during the panel as well, the lovely ladies are going to do a bit of a poetry reading, so we'll get to that soon. So welcome to the three of you. Thank you for being here. Open question to all of you. Why poetry? Either of you can start. It's an open floor. Oh, I think Rani is on mute. Rani might be on mute. Yeah, there we go. Sara, you might want to start.
I'm waiting for Sara to kind of like start. So.
Go for it, Sara. Go for it.
All right. Why poetry? That is, yeah, I mean, you're definitely starting with the easy questions.
Yes.
Well, if you don't mind, Annie, before I do begin, I would also like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, echoing what you said, that I am on Gadigal land, the land of the Eora Nations, and I'd like to pay my utmost respects to elders past and present, and also to Darug land, because that is land that has grown me and welcomed me as a storyteller. Given my people's history of oral storytelling, I am very grateful for these spaces online for now and off, and the generosity, to be able to share our stories with each other, especially in the context of this very exciting new initiative, which is super, super needed. And so I do want to begin with my commitment and humbly acknowledging that I'm on unceded land, and that this was and always will be Aboriginal land. I think that actually brings me also to answering your question around why poetry. And honestly, there's a lot for me in terms of why that is my medium, but I think part of it really goes back to how I was raised as someone in a household where storytelling, and that oral history that I was referring to was really appreciated. The language and the beauty of language and the meaning, how liberating language can be, and also how limiting and restricting it can be. So I always found that I had this interesting relationship with language in all its forms, whether it be in creative and prose and in sort of maybe more academic writing, but as well as poetry and song and so on. And so I guess that's kind of a broad a broad context, but also I think for me, I did accidentally fall into poetry, like taking it up as as where I want to put my creative energies into. And I probably wouldn't be able to, answer this question in a way that does it justice without mentioning Bankstown Poetry Slam, which many of you might know is one of the is the largest slam in the Southern Hemisphere, but also a very, sort of homegrown, self-determined community that brought together, that was co-founded by poets in Western Sydney who were very tired of the whiteness of poetry spaces in the institutions, and co-founded it as a way to bring together and to be really inclusive and to have difficult and loving and messy and complicated conversations with each other as members of marginalized communities, and to do that in a way that was not subject to the white gaze. So the reason I say that is because that's actually where I kind of fell into poetry, and I guess it's been a lifelong journey ever since. So that's sort of my background, or how I came to it.
Sure, wonderful. Before we go to Rania, Maryam, Sara, if you could just tell us a little bit about what you have written so far and where we can find some pieces that you have written as well.
Sure. So, I mean, I've written a whole bunch of poems that are published in a whole bunch of places. So I'm very privileged to be able to have my poems in platforms like the Australian Book Review or Overland Literary Journal, Cordite, Red Room. So if you look them up, you can easily Google them, and a couple of videos as well that are online. So yeah, and I am hopefully working on a collection very soon, inshallah.
Ameen, wonderful. Thank you very much, Sara, for that. Rania, we'll cross to you and then to Maryam. So same question, why poetry? And maybe tell us a little bit about some of the pieces that you've written as well.
Well, why poetry? Poetry to me is a canvas with virtual paint. So I just love stirring the imagery for people, and I find that this is probably the best medium for me. Always been a lover of literature. Being somebody who migrated at the age of 11, poetry was my medium of healing from the trauma of migration. And I found the more I did poetry, the more I realized it heals others as well. And so that's why poetry for me, I'd have to say.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Rania, what you've written so far, where we can find it?
I have an Instagram page, Poetry Heaven 101.
Yep.
And I also have Poetry Heaven on Facebook, and I've printed, I've handed in some poetry to Podium magazine and to AMUS, so Australian Muslim Times.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I have a couple of mentors, Sara being one of them. So every time I think of actually publishing something somewhere, I read hers and I'm like, I'm not ready yet. So I'll just wait.
Okay, we're going to have a conversation about that. But anyway,
never say never, honestly. Never sell yourself short. I tell everybody that. We're all accomplished here, and we're all aspiring to great things, which is great. Last but not least, Maryam, thank you again for joining us. Same question, and a little bit about yourself and where we can find your work as well.
Sure. Okay. Well, I guess like most writers, I fell into writing through my love of reading. I remember the very first piece of writing I had published was a poem about how much I loved yogurt in the school newsletter in Year 1. So I've been writing as soon as I could pick up a pen, I guess. But I suppose how I fell into poetry specifically is an English teacher in Year 9 encouraged me to enter a writing competition. And so on the day that it was due, I thought, oh, I better quickly pen something, so just for the teacher's sake, so she's not on my back about it. So on the day it was due, I just quickly wrote this poem, submitted it, and I was pleasantly surprised to win 3rd place in the competition. And I mean, when I look back on that poem, it is terribly cringy. It's called At the Wheel of Ambition. It was this extended metaphor about how, I guess, going for goals is like driving. Anyway, it was terrible. It's still on the internet somewhere. But winning 3rd place made me think that maybe this is something I'd be good at. And so I just put all of my creative energies into writing poetry from that point forward. Wonderful. And what I've come to love about poetry is the fact it's not constrained so much by rules in the same way that fiction is. You don't have so many of the commercial concerns as well that fiction has, because nobody's in poetry for it to sell anyway. I love the potential for wordplay, the ability of poetry to say so much with so few words. I love how we can really concentrate on an image or a moment or an emotion and expand on that. So these are some of the things that I really love about poetry. And so what I guess my labor of love has been is my collection, the Hijab Files. This came out of my honours project at university, where I was basically looking at representations of Muslim women and specifically the hijab in contemporary Australian poetry. And look, you know, Muslim women are mentioned rarely, but when they are, it's always through that very Orientalist gaze where Muslim women never wear hijab by choice, they're oppressed. You know, all of those stereotypes. So I really wanted to be a positive voice in the Australian poetry landscape about what wearing hijab means. Also, you know, all of these writers who'd written about women wearing hijab didn't have that personal experience as well. And I thought it was really important that somebody with that personal experience give that authentic perspective on it. So that's really how I put together the Hijab Files.
Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And a reminder to, oh, Sara, please go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say, Maryam, I take you your yogurt poem and raise you a very cringy poem that I wrote / song when I was like 8 that was about how great the 4 seasons are. And my mom recently found it like a couple of weeks ago because we're moving, and she sent me a screenshot and I was like, please burn this and never show it to anyone ever.
You were 8, Sarah.
So, yeah, 8, maybe 9, but it was really bad. So I feel you on that yogurt front. I actually think yogurt is a fair thing to write about.
Oh dear, don't be so hard on yourself. You were 8. Yeah, I think that sort of draws, because I'm an emerging writer. I don't write poetry. I'm not that creative, but it reminds me what you're telling me about your first poems are like your trunk stories. So you've done that as like sort of your platform. It springboards you to the next best thing. But the first thing is the one that no one sees the light of day of. Like it stays in the trunk. No one sees it, definitely. Just on Maryam's book as well, I wanted to remind our viewers that our festival partner is the Better Read Than Dead bookshop based in Sydney Newtown. Before COVID, I used to go there a lot. It's a wonderful little bookstore, and they have stock of Maryam's book as well. So please make sure you get onto that. We've got a link in the chat for you, and it's also on our Instagram and social pages as well. So thank you for that, ladies, for sharing that story. Now, one thing that I also find within the Muslim community, or I guess in the readership itself, is there's this misconception that if you're a Muslim, you just have to write about the Muslim struggle or your identity, or you only talk about hijab, or your poetry, for example, is autobiographical. That's not necessarily true, right? Like, so that's something like poetry for you, it could be about anything. It's not necessarily about your struggle, your identity. You might write about that, but it's not the only thing that you do. Would that be correct in saying that?
Look, it's really difficult because there is so little in the literature landscape about, you know, what the experience of being a modern Muslim and Muslim women voices and things like that, that, you know, I do feel very much compelled to focus on, you know, the experience of Muslim women. But at the same time, it is frustrating to feel that it's just assumed that this is all I can ever write about, or that everything I write about is what has happened to me personally. I think that's probably the most embarrassing aspect of being a published writer, is that people read your writing and then they feel like they know you. But yeah, so.
Yeah. Sara, Rania, anything that you'd like to add to that, or experiences that you've had in this regard?
Sara?
I know, right?
She's always waiting for Sara to talk.
I'm gonna defer to you on this one first.
Yeah.
I'm not from Sydney. I'm from Melbourne. So my experience is that the from again, like, yeah, there's not many poets of color in Melbourne, and being somebody who's uncomfortable with alcohol and things like that, we're still struggling down here. Sydney has evolved a little bit with this stuff, but us, we haven't. I find, me personally, that when I go on stage, I'm not expected to relate to others. So when I actually do my poetry, I'm expected to either be an angry poet and yell at everybody about the fact that, we are struggling as the Middle East, or I'm supposed to be speaking about la-di-da things, or happy. So that's from the non-Muslims. Now, from the Muslims, I'm expected to only speak about Islamic poetry. So that's my experience. So when I go and speak about humanity, I'm getting the shocked look from both audiences. So most of my poetry is humanly relatable. I try and just be in a medium where all of us can actually connect. And so I get the whole, from a lot of the Muslims, I get the oh, and then from a lot of the non-Muslims, I get the oh. So I'm still trying to, I'm not trying to please anybody, but it's like this is my experience. My experience is that you're not in a box. Why aren't you in a box? So that's my experience.
I think that's the beauty, that you can use your poetry to confuse everybody and say whatever you want. But I mean, I think like it's a really interesting question, and it's quite a loaded one. And, we can have an ongoing discussion about the politics of representation and the burden of representation, I think, of communities. And one of the things that immediately comes to mind for me is, for instance, the fact that some of us may identify as a Muslim poet, or in my case specifically, an Arab Australian, but, Egyptian, Lebanese, Palestinian, which is quite a mouthful. But that is a very deliberate choice, because of the fact that, I am someone who, as, having that Palestinian background, I am constantly facing, erasure. And so I think, and there are, powers that be, let's say, that are aligned and invested in my silencing, in my erasure, and so on. And so I think naming things is quite important for that reason. And, ensuring that you are, you have your agency, you're using that to subvert, and so on. But to understand that you're not being, or your art and what you produce is not being, so to speak, reduced to that. And so, for instance, white poets are never called white poets, they're just poets, and that's the standard. And that speaks and reflects to the society that we're in, where we know that whiteness is the norm on a whole range of levels structurally. It's what Hassan Hash calls the myth of, or the white Australian fantasy. And so I think there's something to be said around that. And so I want to acknowledge that that's a really hard thing that we have to constantly reflect on and battle. But at the same time, I choose to wear that proudly. I choose to honor that in my writing, but it's not to say that that's the only thing I write about. Obviously, these are my experiences. So they're of course going to reflect that background, that heritage, that's going to inform it, but it's not going to be something that I feel compelled to write about all the time. And if I do, then that's my choice as well. So I think if I want to write about being, from those backgrounds and what that means and what that looks like, I will. And if I want to write about my favorite flavored chewing gum or yogurt, I will. And that, and
please do that.
And my job is to make it interesting. My job is to feel something, is to have the reader feel something, is to bring them along on a journey. It's to say whatever it is I want to say and do it in the best way possible. And I will apply that ethic, whether it's, about Palestine or about the gum. But I get, and the last thing I guess I want to end on is I do though feel like we have a responsibility as poets. We're not writing in a vacuum. There is power. We understand these dynamics. So we have a responsibility, and maybe people will disagree with this, but I think we have a responsibility to the communities that we're from, to communities who are systematically denied their humanity time and time again by the institutions and structures of power. So whilst that, I'm not saying that I will romanticize my community or I will not have difficult conversations. I just have to understand that there's a double bind here, and that when I'm wanting to have difficult conversations, let's say about gender or whatever it is, I'm not doing that without, you know, being aware of what are the consequences and who gets harmed in the process. And so I do think we have a responsibility to think about that and how we do these things in an ethical way. So, you know, that is the, you know, poetry is not as straightforward, writing is not as straightforward. Every act has to come with an intention, which I like to remind myself of, which I like to set. Why am I doing this? Why am I writing this? Who is it for? And you know, those are the kinds of questions that I think that process of introspection and reflection beg of us, even just as Muslims in our daily endeavors and activities.
Yeah, wonderful. Maryam, Rania, anything else you'd like to add to that?
I think that what Sara said was brilliant, and it's exactly what I was saying. Like, you know, we do have the right to you know, get those societies to understand what's actually happening. My thing is when I do it in a way that is different, that's when I'm like, for example, one of my biggest favorite poem about the war in Syria is pretty much just put all in a way that it's like a cooking show, so people can relate. And so I refer to the poem as Red Velvet in terms of the blood and the you know, the ashes and the brown skin and everything else to do with a red velvet cupcake. And so if my experience is, if somebody says that, if somebody sees that from the Muslim community, that was too soft. But if someone sees that from the non-Muslim community, oh, I really related to that, but I didn't know you can speak English. So it's very
okay.
Can I ask, you said that you know, you feel like our role is to make them understand, but I don't know that I necessarily like agree with that, because, you know, in a lot of ways we have been trying to convince people so much of our humanity, and that, you know, certainly it hasn't changed the way things are. And so I just feel like it's interesting to me, because I do agree with something that Maryam said earlier around poetry as being a, you know, a powerful tool, and we can't divorce that, you know, in terms of the fact that it's undeniably political. We are undeniably political, whether we like it or not. But I also think that, you know, we have the privilege to be able to take language, to use it to challenge, to invoke, to create thought. You know, that's what language does. You create thought, and thought is what inspires people and moves them into meaningful action, right? So I always say that, like, my poem is not going to bring down a border or, you know, a wall or shut down detention centers down the road, but it is going to be, I mean, I hope it is, you know, used to hold power to account and to inspire people to do those things. So, you know, one day, inshallah.
I completely
it is.
I completely agree, and I get myself to remind, like, just to remember that every time I actually perform a poem, I just say, if I can come out with one person in that crowd going, you know, maybe there's another side to this, then that's enough for me.
Yeah. Maryam?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there really to sort of delve into. I think one of the things I had to unlearn in my in journey as a writer is this sort of, it happens almost subconsciously, that as I write, I find myself explaining, you know, the way I do things, Muslim rituals, Pakistani culture for the white gaze. So I find myself over-explaining in my writing this idea that Islamic terms need to be italicized in poems, that you need to accompany a collection with a glossary. I did find, like, over my journey of becoming a writer, that a lot of these things that we're used to as being conventional in writing, that's not, I guess, by a white person or about white culture is it's very otherizing. So, I mean, I've chosen not to have a glossary in my collection, for example, because to me it felt like including a glossary is like I'm making myself the other. I'm sort of showing that this is something people aren't supposed to know, whereas I want to legitimize, you know, my Muslim characters as Australians, as part of the Australian landscape, and not something otherized.
Yeah. Sorry, we just had I just froze for a second, but I'm okay. I'm back now. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Maria. Yeah, it's very interesting hearing from both of you, because I don't write poetry myself, but a lot of what you're saying does ring very true for a writer, even in like a middle grade space, which is what I'm writing at the moment. And it's trying to find that balance between staying true to yourself and staying true to your identity and writing for your audience, but balancing that out to someone who doesn't really speak your language. So where do you find that balance? So it's very interesting. In terms of being poets yourself, is there a large gap in the poetry industry, if you will, between Muslim and non-Muslim poets? Is there a huge gap? Or is it something that's closing?
Well, look, it's really exciting. I mean, Sarah's made some groundbreaking achievements recently for Muslim writers in Australia with the prizes she's won for her poetry. Rania as well is breaking ground as well, you know, on the poetry slam scene. So honestly, I'm really optimistic and positive about all of the Australian Muslim writers coming forward. Do I feel there's a gap? I do. Part of it is, I guess, when you want to move forward as a writer, when you want to, you know, publish and that sort of thing, you've got to work in partnership with an editor, with a publisher. And one of the issues is it's hard to find editors who understand where you're coming from in your writing and who might not understand what you're trying to do with this particular technique, or what you're trying to say, or why this image is important. So I do feel it is just a little bit harder for us Muslim writers in that sense. I don't know, Rania and Sarah, what you want to add to that?
I actually completely agree with Maryam. But there is a big gap in terms of this, just because, and it's not just in poetry. I think it's like, I'm talking in terms of Melbourne. It's generally any artist of color find it a little bit hard to afford. Like, for example, a lot of the producers coming from the Asian continent or something would be expected to be talking about the good little migrant, you know, and so you're, as a Muslim writer, you're boxed into this thing. And so if you know, dare to, you know, move away from the matrix, then you're kind of just finding it very difficult to you have no choice but to self-publish. And then after self-publishing, you've got to find your audience, like, and then you go into, again, what Sara was saying. So you're going into the Muslim bookshops, and then you're expected to be this one way. And then so you're going into the non-Muslim bookshops, and you're expected to be, oh, well, you're not really in that box. So it's a little bit, it's a struggle.
Yeah, I also want to add about, yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add about poetry spaces as well. Like, you know, we're really lucky there are a few safe spaces out there, like Bankstown Poetry Slam, for example, but many of them are still very uncomfortable for me to enter as a Muslim poet. For example, I remember attending a book launch for a poetry book at a bookstore. I think it was somewhere in the inner western suburbs, and there was nothing I could drink there. They were only serving alcohol, you know. So, I mean, these things seem minor, you know, like I could just choose. Obviously, I had to choose not to drink anything the entire time I was there, but they do make you feel excluded. You know, these are all just those little things that build up and just make it that much harder to, you know, I mean, get the motivation to, again, go to one of these places. I was the only person wearing hijab in the room as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. Me too. I usually am the only person too. And that's probably, I've been told that that's the reason why I haven't been, like, people have been wanting to just feature me, but because of this issue, especially in Melbourne, you know, it's not happening.
Yeah, it's hard.
Oh.
So interesting, because Melbourne, Nam, like there's so many progressive, communities and spaces and people, that are at the front line of, the forefront, I suppose, of doing work in different spaces and trying to, I guess, create communities of solidarity, or pockets, I guess, of solidarity in a lot of ways. So it's disappointing and sad to hear that that's been your experience, for sure, because I am very lucky that Bankstown exists, and I totally hear your point around the fact that there's so many spaces that aren't inclusive or safe, and that's not just to Muslims who don't choose to drink. That's lots of people who don't choose to drink for a whole bunch of other reasons, least of all the fact that's vestiges of colonization linked to alcohol, but that's a whole other story. But also just people who don't feel like those spaces are politically, the values are aligned, maybe, in that they're quite racist or casually racist, or whatever it is. But I can I just, Maryam, thank you so much for saying what you said earlier, and I wanted to acknowledge that you and I both know that I didn't get here alone, and that these things, like a prize or no prize, I'd still be writing, and I wouldn't be doing it without honoring and standing on the shoulders of the trailblazers that came before us, whether we know about them or whether we don't. And so I really want to say that, because, and to me, it's not just some throwaway line, because I am really invested in not exceptionalizing us. Like, I'm not interested in being the only anything. I don't think any of us are. I think that even just broadly speaking, that's again part of our Islamic ethic, but our politics, that I don't want one or two celebrity Muslim whatever. I want a movement. I want to be able to be part of a movement that elevates poets and makes room for poets of color, and people who feel that they've been traditionally excluded or deliberately excluded and silenced, and from these spaces. That's what I want. And so I feel like, and we're getting there, and the only way we can get there is if we rely on those spaces to give us power, or to make space for us, because that's always going to come with conditions. I think what we need to be doing is investing in each other. Investing is such a douchey term anyway, but you know what, I don't mean it in the capitalistic sense, just go with it, but like putting our efforts, our time, our energy, our love, our care into each other, and into being able to create these spaces. And I think that's why Rania, if there aren't spaces that you feel include you, why not create them? Or why not partner or join, collaborate with others to create them? Like, that's how these organic movements, I think, happen. And that's how we create what Ghassan Haj, second name drop, I apologize, is not deliberate, but he calls alter spaces. So alternative spaces that are for us and by us, so that we're not relying on others to say, here, you can have this little crumb, and it's conditional on your performance. It's your conditional on you being Jasmine, or you being behaved, or you performing a self-orientalist role, as Maryam was saying earlier. So I really do think that our best hope is to actually build with each other and create and imagine with each other. And that's really like the way forward in terms of being able to have these spaces and bridge that gap that you were talking about, Annie.
And continue as well. And definitely keep going, because what ends up happening is that, especially in Melbourne, is that people will do that, but then there's not much interest, and so it dies down, and so another one dies down again. So it's just this persistency. So
and look, I understand that performance poetry isn't for everyone. That's fine too. I think the reason I bring it up is because that there was a lot there for me that actually reflected and embodied the values that we're talking about. So even when I stopped performing a long time ago, it was about showing up for people. It was about elevating. It was about amplifying and supporting. And it was about the fact that you're in a space where it's not hierarchical, and we're having these conversations in a way that is had with that spirit of generosity that I was talking about.
Definitely. And everything that you're saying is ringing true to me. And that was pretty much why, Uzka, Arsen, and myself created this network, we're not in competition with anybody. We're trying to connect with our fellow Muslim writers, readers, poets, creators. You know, we want to connect. We want to show the world that we are a united front. Like we are the Ummah. We're together. Again, it's not a competition. And yeah, definitely, like what Rania was saying, keep it going. Don't just, you know, get there for the hype and then walk away. No, keep it going, keep it moving. Which is, yeah, it's very true what you're saying. Look, we've highlighted the struggles that poets, particular Muslim poets, have faced. What I'd like to focus on is the joyful part of your poetry, which would be your creative process. Can we talk about your creative process? Like, it's because for someone who doesn't do poetry,
Yes.
in my head, I'm thinking, are you sitting somewhere with a book and it all comes to you and you're writing it all down? How does it work? Tell us.
100% it's us in like Central Park or Hyde Park. Yeah, but you know, Central Park works better for the metaphor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the wind blowing in our hijab and it's like super glamorous.
Is that it? No. Oh, I was thinking, did I picture it correctly?
Miriam, what's your writing process?
Yeah, tell us your process. Yeah.
So I guess what I've learned as a writer is that good writing makes an original contribution to knowledge. So when I'm thinking about writing a poem, I'm really thinking about what is the meaningful thing that this poem has to say, you know, and that's sort of then my litmus test with whether I should sit down and write it. And then it sometimes comes, you know, in a little burst of inspiration. So, you know, I might be, I've got a little one, she's a year old now, but in the early days of postpartum, you know, you spend a lot of time on the couch feeding. And so I just be, you know, typing out on my phone things that come to me that I get inspired about. So I guess, you know, so sometimes I think about the topic first and then I go for it. Other times I just go for it because I'm in the zone, words are flowing. And then afterwards I think about, look, is there something, can I make an original contribution to knowledge with this? If yes, then I'll work on the editing process. If not, then no, I just wrote that for myself and I'll put it aside.
Wonderful. Yeah. Rania, Sara?
I'll let Sara go this time.
It's like, don't all talk at once.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like my poetry has definitely been, my process has been impacted a lot in the last couple of, well, let's say 2 years, because of, you know, all the kind of changes and challenges that we've been facing. And I was actually just talking about that the other day, that it's a lot, I'm a lot more fatigued now, and I'm trying to find ways to deal with that and cope with that and what that looks like. But for me, you know, thinking about space and my space and what that means, how your relationship to that changes, what, you know, thinking about things like your, you know, confluence with mind and body. Also, so the relationship between that, because again, I just feel perennially exhausted and I'm trying to address that. And, you know, like, I think I'm trying to be kind to myself in my writing as well. And you know, not having to have constant like structures and deadlines and working towards that, because again, it all feels very exhausting at the moment. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. So, but that aside, you know, living out my best plant mom dreams aside, I think generally my process, one of the things that is fundamental to my writing, and I think any writer, is reading. And Maryam said that earlier, in terms of her love for reading, is what, you know, contributed to poetry. And I think for me, it's a continuous being able to be someone who is an eternal perennial student, always reading, always, you know, consuming that knowledge and being inspired by it, and observing around me, observing nature, observing relationships, people, the smallest, you know, minutia, I think, of that is something that I think is fundamental to my relationship with poetry and that reflection. So yeah, for sure, read as much as you can, poets that you enjoy and you write and beyond, as well as poets that maybe you don't or aren't really your style, because you're always still learning something. If any, you know, you might not be learning what you like, but you're learning what you don't like, what you don't want to do, for example. So there's that. And I think just putting yourself in sort of challenging creative spaces and situations as well. So for example, when you're not writing, give yourself a chance to play. So that means going out there, when we have the chance to experience art at a gallery or photographs or museum or nature, best canvas, those things are actually still, your mind is still working and still at play. It's still being inspired in order to then put that back into whatever it is that you want to write.
Wonderful, fantastic. We are going to do a bit of a poetry reading with the three of you shortly. I'm really excited to hear your work. I'm waiting for this. But we do have a question from our co-host, Aksa. She wanted to ask you a question, and there's also been a lot of commentary in the chat. So thank you everyone for sending your positive comments and love through. There's also been a request for the Right Pen Collective to host a poetry slam. So I think we will have to invite the three of you back and do a poetry slam one day, inshallah. That would be really good. Yeah, Aksan, sister, if you're there, can you hear us?
Yes. That was really, I think that's what, coming to what Sara said, that TRPC really is about that leveraging of consuming language, written forms of language and spoken language. And that's exactly what our platform is about. I love that you said that. We're trying to really leverage that too. Let's consume as much of this written and spoken language. Secondly, my actual question here is, poetic expression is part of our faith, even our holy scripture, our Quran. That poetic expression is all throughout the scripture, and people can even memorize the entire Quran because of that. Now, that sort of died. It was part of our traditions, going to souks and bazaars. You always had the podiums ready. The poets were expressing this. It was such a common place. Where do you think we've lost this? Or is it because of the diaspora of the Muslims in the world that we've had to take on a second language, which is that English? And now that we're comfortable with this, we can go back to owning back that poetic expression. What do you think about this?
Good question.
I think
I guess sorry, Rania, did you want to go first? Okay, I was just going to say, well, look, coming from a Pakistani background, Pakistan has a very strong poetic tradition, and I haven't seen any break in the continuity of that. It's a really rich poetic tradition. But what I have noticed is the impact of colonialism on the poetry tradition. So for example, a few years ago when my family was in Pakistan, my mum was invited to attend a literary event at the Punjab Club, which is a very exclusive club in Lahore. And so she thought, that there'd be Punjabi poetry being shared. She was really excited. But when she went there, it was actually a lecture on Shakespeare. And, it was kind of disappointing to hear that, it wasn't our own Pakistani rich literary traditions being celebrated, but instead we've been sort of, celebrating English literature instead. So I sort of do feel that we've lost some of our value for our own literary traditions. But yeah, I mean, speaking from a Pakistani background, it's always been strong.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Rania, wouldn't you? Arabic?
100%. My background is Egyptian. It definitely is colonialism plus something else. Just with my own culture, it's just moving away from Islam as well. Again, due to colonialism and this whole classism issue with Egypt. So now, from poetry being at the olden days, poetry being the medium, like if you wanted to diss somebody, it's through poetry. If you wanted to praise a king, it's through poetry. Now you are viewed as an entertainer. And so if you're not a doctor or an engineer, then this whole artist thing is just completely diminished. It's like, oh, you're an artist. Oh. So it's just look, even when I decided to actually pursue poetry professionally, they're like the idea was you're gonna parade yourself on stage for entertainment. And then I was like, I beg your pardon? So again, moving away from our Islamic tradition itself and how things used to be, and the power of language, as Sara said, you know, and even the power, like in the power of language through like to promote love of God and love of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and all that's all gone. And it's just become lectures, and then we wonder why we're losing our youth. And so there was always these mediums, like it said that there's about 300 ways Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, go pray. But we just use this one way now. Again, that's part of it. Pray. Did you pray yet? Pray. Did you pray yet? And then we're wondering why we're losing it. So, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows our senses. There's all these different you know, actions that you can do. If you can't do qiyam, you can do fasting. If you can't do this, you can. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows we're not one mold, but the Muslims, they're just shoving us into this one mold. And it's like, yeah. Not all, of course, I'm generalizing. It's just the typical, you know, whether it comes to women, it's not just poetry. Literally everything. You've got to be this one cookie cutter, and if you're not, it's like this, you know, I got asked this by Muslims and non-Muslims. Oh, you don't really fit in a box. My answer was like, I didn't know there was a box. No one.
I was going to say, what box?
Isn't that the whole point of neoliberalist ideologies anyway? It's so much easier to get us all to conform and to not think critically, which is one of the key foundations of our religion, as we know. And I think, I mean, that's the thing. I definitely agree with Maryam that there's a Eurocentricity in our education, and that is obviously a byproduct of colonialism. It's we will give you the language and tell you how to speak it and when you can speak it and so on. And so I think there's definitely that is a big part of it, be it here in Australia, where we're on literally stolen land and we're not even taught our history properly. We're not even taught or, you know, the languages of the various hundreds of nations and communities, you know, are not honored, are not front and center. So yes, that is part of ongoing colonization from here to across the Middle East and you know, settler colonial projects everywhere. And like for me, Eurocentricity is one thing, but I also do agree that to an extent it's internalized, and that is actually also the complicity of the way structures of power work across the globe. And so what I'm saying is, for example, you know, artists, governments, people in power fear artists everywhere. That's not just here, that's in, be it in, you know, Egypt, as someone who's also Egyptian, like I totally understand that, and other places as well, because as I was saying before, an artist's role, a poet's role traditionally has been to be critical. And right now, the idea that we could, you know, we're in a burning building and talking about the fire is not something that any of these leaders, these governments, those complicit in these inequalities and inequities want. And so, like, I definitely agree that to an extent, this is because artists are being silenced, they're being diminished, they're, you know, they're being reduced, their roles aren't taken seriously. And so, and you know, that's on us to be able to name and to keep creating. And that's why, in order to subvert that, we need to be able to use poetry in the way that we know how, be it here or in Egypt and so on.
Fantastic. Oh, it's been amazing listening to you. I could listen to the three of you all day, honestly. It's unfortunate we only have an hour to do this particular panel. Look, conscious of time, first of all, I want to thank Maryam, Rania and Sara for being here and, you know, giving us their insights into their experience as poets and what it is like for Muslim poets here in Australia. But now for the fun part, our poetry reading. So who would like to go first? It's okay.
Rania?
Go on. Rania.
Yeah.
All right, Rania, you're in.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Can you tell I've never performed in front of Sara before?
Yes, you have. I'm really sad that you've forgotten.
Oh, okay. Now I'm more nervous. Now I'm more nervous. All right. My poem's called Robots. Okay. Take one step forward and one step back. Forward back, forward, back. Are we there yet? We live as dysfunctional robots, taking opposing steps, only to realize, despite the effort, we still stand in the one spot. Fast forwarding to success, rewinding to youth and vitality. We burn ourselves out, desperate to combine the two moments, future and past, because you've got to be perfect. No lines or rolls, no bellies, just weight goals. The sky is the limit, no downfalls. Cover them up with CoverGirl, or maybe it's Maybelline. Curl those lashes, lengthen those heels, pump those biceps, hide those wrinkles, serum the way forward, backward, layer over layer until we forget we are alive under there. Head so crowded and it's hard to find a silent corner to listen to the subtle whispers made to guide the way when birds chirp as loud as sunset while flying in circles, and why we never capture the magic of rainfall on green leaves. We hide, cover our ears when puppies bark at the break of dawn. We sleep. When the wind caresses bright rosy cheeks, we put on coats. As waves tickle bare feet on the sandy shores, we move back when we should step forward, like stallions sprinting to nowhere land, despite the fog. But our heads are filled with fog. Our fog is full of thoughts, blinding the way with worry. Am I rich enough? Am I pretty enough? Am I enough? Am I skinny enough? Am I enough? Head so crowded until tomorrow becomes a barrier standing in the way of today, so we no longer see where we need to be, and like dysfunctional robots, we take a step forward and 2 steps back in pursuit of capturing those 2 moments, success and youthful vitality. Forward and back, forward and back. Now tell me, are we there yet?
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I see clickings, and I've seen poetry slams. They do clicking. Wow, that's wow. Actually, I just wanted to jump in very quickly when you mentioned the Maybelline. It wasn't very long ago, I actually saw a hijabi girl in a Maybelline ad, and I gasped because that was the first time in my entire life I saw a hijabi girl on TV advertising makeup. Like, that's never happened before, which goes to show that the gap is still there, definitely. Okay, who would like to go next? Sara, Maryam?
I don't know. I can't go after Rania. I'm too
Oh,
I'm in front of Rania now. I can't.
We'll just go in alphabetical order.
It's not a competition, ladies. You're all amazing.
No, she's so much better than me. She's brilliant.
Oh, shall we flip a coin? Who goes next?
I'm happy to go
No.
next. And we can
Okay.
pick Maryam for last.
Okay, sure. Sara, please, the stage is yours.
Little city, on your scorched days, Rania and I pool our khamsmiyas, buy bonjous from Ba'al Abu Fadi, sell them for triple the price. Dollar law samahat. This country has us believing we are so clever, so entrepreneurial. The neighborhood kids should be grateful. Mama, look at us. Don't we make you proud? Little city, on your anxious nights, we gather in balconies, lighthouse beacons with little to no light wreathed in smoke. We wait, we sit, we speak over each other. Ya Alay, inshallah, no one actually wants to hear the answers. I can't afford to trust the morning. I am still learning to believe it when it comes. Little city, we want to sing, want to giggle silly over boys and simple things, but you have different plans. Young men on tanks cuss loudly, young men on tanks whistle at us, eyes open, empty, this dark, this shatter. We tell them we have God, but I don't think they believe us. Little city, we climb to the top of the steeple, stairs quiet and quieter. past jasmine bushes, past bullet holes, confetti of 86. No one bothers with plaster. Is it any wonder we don't have mothers and fathers? How long will you hate yourself into something we can love? Little city, trying to forget. Little city, how did you survive? What did they call you? Before Syria, before Israel, before France, before Ottoman, before, little city. What becomes of history if there remain no artists to write of it? Your pages are long, your patience longer. Thank you.
Wow.
Told you she was brilliant.
Wow. Both of you struck a chord with me here. I was trying to hold the emotion in then. Amazing. Last but not least, Maryam.
Okay, so I'm going to read a poem from my book, The Hijab Files. It's called We Meet Again, and it starts with an epigraph. So, the souls had their rendezvous, those who liked each other then, love here, those who remained strangers then, do not join here. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The first time we met was not the first, I swear. By the tumbling of light and dark in your eyes and the crumbling of my thoughts in answer, our memory electrified, except we had forgotten to go to class and felt the piercing of this place, the way that entering into prayer pierces a place. The edges of our meeting were clouded over with the rolling mist of ancient memories, so that we could pretend we were standing on shuddering stars and not on star-shaped leaves along the cracked cement path to the campus musalla. Suddenly, the pin popped out of my hijab and the significance popped out of the moment, and all seemed lost except I was able to fix my scarf, so that in the curve of your half smile and in the shiver of my arms and in the looks we exchanged like messages we remembered. This was an introduction of bodies. The whiteness of your wrist, the perfect sculpture of your teeth, these are burned in my memory.
Oh, wow. Wow. All the snaps and the claps. Oh, wow. Seriously, listening to the three of you, I'm trying so hard to like not cry. I'm overcome with emotion listening to your creative work. It is amazing. I want to thank the three of you for spending your afternoon talking to us about your poetry experience and for that beautiful reading. Inshallah, we will have that poetry slam. We're getting a lot of requests in the chat to have the Right Pen Collective poetry slam. So we're definitely going to have to get onto this again. So once again, Maryam Azam, Rania Ahmed, and Sara Saleh, thank you so much for being part of our virtual festival and for creating. Thank you very much for feeding us with your wonderful words. And also again to Uzka and Aksen, the co-founders of TRPC, as I like to call it, for helping us get this festival together and for being our tech support for the day on Zoom. So thank you so much. And to all the viewers, thank you very much for being here. Once again, please visit us on our social media, The Right Pen Collective. You can find us there. And also, if you would like to find some published works by our special guests, please head to the Better Read Than Dead link, I should say, and all the books are listed there. Sisters, thank you so much. Any last words before we wrap up?
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I love what you're doing with the Right Pen Collective.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you.